Do you wish that you could make a bigger difference in your school? Well, join us as we talk about how servant leadership can transform your classroom and your school. Well, welcome back to the Teach for the Heart podcast, where we tackle teaching challenges from a biblical perspective. Why are we here? Because we don't believe that our spiritual walk and teaching profession should exist in two separate domains. Rather, the hope we have in Christ should change how we approach everything, not just at home, but at school as well. So join us as we explore both the spiritual and practical sides of key teaching challenges, integrating them together so we can succeed at teaching, glorify God, and make a lasting difference in our students' hearts and lives. This episode is brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation. I'm so excited to be joined today by Dr. Matthew Flippen, the president of Gracelyn University and author of Win with Your Talent Pipeline. Matthew, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. What a treat to get to be with you. You are amazing, and the organization that you've built and the mission that you're having is so impactful. So it's a great honor for me to get to be with you today.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'm really excited to be talking about some of the amazing things that God is growing and opportunities that you're creating over at Graceland as well. But before we get into that, our topic today is about servant leadership and how it can transform schools. And as we were talking about this before, I was talking and asking you, man, is this just for administrators or is this for teachers too? So what would you say about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, the concept of servant leadership is really based on the process of building trusted relationships at stage one, then accurately assessing where we are as a group, and then setting a vision for how we can move forward. So, we can do this in our families, right? My children need to trust me. I somewhat need to trust them, right? And then we need to be like, hey, where are the areas you need to grow? But what's really our vision for our family? That translates to classrooms as well, right? Teachers that have the most impact with children first build healthy relationships with them. Well, healthy relationships foundation is trust. And so when you do that, children can learn. There's lots of neuroscience to support how trusted relationships, safe environments are necessary for children to learn. And so, yes, these principles are applicable wherever you are. You can use them to make an impact with the lives that you're able to touch.
Right. And I think sometimes obviously if you're an administrator, a principal, a school leader, you have that leader hat on. But sometimes if you're not, you might think, I'm not really a leader, but you are. You're definitely, if you're a teacher, you are leading your classroom, and there's always areas of influence that we have. So I'm really excited to dive into this. So you mentioned a few different areas that are steps that we need to go through. So can you talk about what's that first step where we want to start if we said, I want to make a difference, I want to be a leader in this area?
Yes, yeah. And to have the title and have influence are two different things, potentially. So you can have influence in building trust, building a healthy relationship, being a servant leader without having the title. And I actually would say that in a lot of our school buildings, some of our most influential leaders don't have the title. So that's probably those listening to this and part of your organization, if I was going to guess, Linda. But yeah, so our research started with how do schools transform? Why is it that there are some broken schools that see rapid transformation to thriving schools? Why does that happen? And is there a model that is used by these transformational educators? And so we set out to interview and determine what are the steps. We had some thoughts, right? That trust might be the first step in establishing it. And so just recently I had the opportunity to visit with some transformational superintendents in some school districts. One of those was Dr. Ramiro Nava, and he is currently a superintendent, but he took me back to a time when he was at Neil Armstrong, a very rough school in kind of every way that you could imagine. Right. This was not only was it a traditional elementary, it was also a magnet special education school in his area. So when you looked at their metrics, they were lots of fights, low parent engagement, low student performance, really low faculty morale. But yet in a short period of time, this school moved beyond all of those metrics. So I sat down with Dr. Nava and said, okay, what happened? What did you do? And he said, well, the first thing when you get to a new campus is you need to listen. And I was like, oh, so what does that look like? And he said, that looked like me taking time to sit down with each person on my staff a few minutes at a time and just getting to know them and ask them what they thought was working well and what they thought was broken and where we could improve. And he said, just taking the time to listen really made a big difference. But Linda, when you were in the classroom, I'm sure there was kind of like that. Maybe there's that one student that you were like, wow, this student is a lot of challenges. Do you remember that? Yeah. Yeah. So this school, Neil Armstrong, had one that was known school-wide as always getting into fights, really having a hard time. And the school was actually a little bit afraid to call his parents, his dad, because his dad was about 6'6", 240 pounds, covered in tattoos, shaved head, just looked extremely intimidating. But of course, Dr. Nava is a humble servant leader. So this little boy gets into trouble right away, and he gets to call the dad. And when the dad came in, Dr. Nava sat down with him and he said, sir, I wanted to visit with you today about how we can help your child be more successful. And he said, this big old guy sat back and didn't say anything for a few seconds. And he said, Dr. Nava, no one's ever said that to me before. Dr. Nava was like, said what? He said, no one's ever called me sir. And no one has ever asked me how they could help my son. And Dr. Nava said, well, I think some of our staff has been intimidated to visit with you. And this gentleman said, I look tough. All of this. He said, but that actually is my old life. I actually met the Lord. And I would do anything for my son. So do you think that dad became a fan of Dr. Nava?
I bet so.
I bet he did. And when Dr. Nava was sharing the story with me, as I am now, I just thought, oh wow, if we just could look past the surface sometimes and see that our people on our campus have been hurting, and they need us to listen to them, right? They need us to learn from them, and they need us to respond to this information, to steward this gift they gave us and trust into taking us to a new future. So that was just one example.
Yes. Yeah. So that just kind of building that trust, and that's just that authenticity. That's so powerful. So where do we go from there?
Yes. And so what's cool about trust is once, and of course, trust isn't something you just do it overnight. It takes time, and you invest in it. It's also real easy to lose it, and to violate something that does that. So, but if you're able to have that in place, then when it gets to, hey, we really need to take a critical look at what are some systems things or some processes or the way we're treating kids that we need to adjust. And so, I also got to visit recently with Jim Vasquez, who is now the superintendent in one of the largest school districts around in the El Paso area, Socorro ISD. But way back, he was principal at Horizon Heights Elementary, and it was very interesting, to listen to him talk about how, as they got through trust and they started looking at the data, like, hey, where, how do we assess what we're doing? They realized that they were ranked number one in the district for student discipline and expulsions, and so. What he said was, well, we need to reevaluate how we are handling discipline. And what had happened was a system had just gotten in place that didn't start with earlier interventions, right? It was kind of like 0 to 100, which, my kids have accused me of before, as well. So I'm like, Dad, you need to have like can we get a little warning or a little warm up to, the ultimate consequence? And so Jim implemented a process, that was there as well, and shared that with his team. So that, of course, made a huge difference.
This episode is brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation. And I have to tell you, I just went to a Herzog event last week, and it was just amazing to see how much God is doing in education at large, but specifically at the Herzog Foundation. They are really pouring into particularly Christian schools in an incredible way. And if you're teaching at a Christian school, you should definitely be checking them out. In particular, take a look at their amazing lineup of free trainings. I mean, even lodging and meals are included for free. So you definitely don't want to miss that. Another resource that everyone can enjoy no matter where you teach is their Faith and Freedom 250 video series, which tells stories of faith, sacrifice, and courage from America's history. So please check out these and so many more resources at herzogfoundation.com. That's herzogfoundation.com. Now back to our conversation. Yeah. So if there's a teacher or an admin that's kind of listening to this, I love these stories. They really help bring it to life. Is the key here just really taking an honest look at, what's wrong and just strategizing, kind of visioning what could make it better? Any tips for them as they kind of think that through?
Yeah, that's it. That's a great step. So, great question, Linda. So, it makes me think about, like, what does this actually look like? And there is she's currently a superintendent as well, Dr. Karen Engel, and she told me about when she was assigned the worst performing campus in the district. So out of 45 schools, hers was ranked number 45, and it was and when she got there, it, of course, if your staff knows you're 45, what do you think their identity looks like? Right. And this was supposed to be like a last chance school. So for children that were not succeeding, they were sent here, they had to apply, they had to get in, and it was like, hey, you got to make it through this program or you won't be in any school. So super important. And so for her, it was heartbreaking to think, wow, we're the worst performing school and we've got the most vulnerable students, with us. And so, so when I said, okay, what are the steps? Right. And she said, well, I got there about 6 weeks before school started, and I listened to all of my staff. And she said, pretty quickly when I said, hey, what's working, what's not working, they identified that actually this particular school had hired an outside consultant to help who was very condescending in their coaching. And she said, they just weren't treating my people with dignity. And of course, I'm like, wow, what a leader that you would even recognize that. Like, you'd be sensitive to, and she told me that when she arrived that she could feel the spirit, like a oppression at the campus. And she was like, wow, this needs to feel totally different. So, so through this whole interview process, she identified people aren't being treated with dignity and respect. So she ended the contract with that person with step one. And as soon as that happened, the staff was like, oh, wait a minute, this leader actually respects us. So now we've got trust and respect working. Then we start to identify, and assess what are the challenges. And then they built a vision of how they would move. Now, when you're worst in the district, how long do you think it should take to get to, almost exceptional?
I mean, you'd think it would take years.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I would think if ever, right?
Right.
Especially given, the children that are coming to you have major deficits in their education because of the discipline issues they've had and all that. So by the end of her second year, they were almost exceptional rated.
Wow.
So you think about that. I mean, that's 18 months of time together, 9 and 9. And I said, how did that happen? She said, trust. right? Mutual respect, shared vision about what we could do. And I said, so, when I'm always curious, like, was that just your personality, Karen? Was it, did that stay after you were gone? And she said, well, it's been 10 years now and they keep getting better and better since I was there. And I said, that is so the mark, because she had handed ownership of this vision to the teachers on the campus. And that's something I would want, all the teachers listening to this to think about, when you really own, like, hey, we can come together because we're going to be here longer than probably our leader, right? We want to support our leader, but we're going to be here. And so we need to have a shared vision that we can take hold of, that really is an identity of we can do it, right? We can lead transformation. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So this idea
That
of
resonate?
having a vision and just thinking through, like, what do we want this school to be, right? Like, what characteristics do we want to embody,
Yes.
and kind of painting that. Yeah, when you have that and you share it, it's really powerful. When you have multiple people feeding into that and working together, yeah, amazing things can happen. That's so cool. Any tips as in that kind of that aspect of, how do you know what the vision should be, or how do you communicate that? I know that's a whole topic, but any
Oh, of course,
maybe
of
a
course.
one thing that you'd want to leave people with?
Yeah. I mean, again, I think when you bring your people together, right, and you've listened to them, you've learned from them, and I'm saying, if you've interviewed 100 people on your campus and they've given you pieces that could be improved, that forms the basis of your path forward. And so now you've got to prioritize of that list. Of course, they gave it to you, and so when you are highlighting, hey, here's all the feedback that you guys gave me. Here's how I'm going to value that and take that to move forward. And then you try to hit the low hanging fruit quick, right? You try to build relationships with families next, and get to a community, supporting you, and then ultimately, out of trusted relationships and this mutual respect, academic performance actually does start to grow.
Mhm.
When children are safe and feel safe psychologically, emotionally in classrooms, they learn, right? When the environment becomes one where people are smiling and supportive, there is a power that flows out of just being positive, and not fake positive, but like you actually enjoy, we always say, we want people to feel known, loved, and inspired by their purpose,
Yeah.
right? Whether that is as a campus leader, I want to do that with my staff, and I want my staff, my teaching staff, to do that with the children in their rooms. Yep.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for just sharing with us and inspiring us with these stories of, sometimes we do think, this is hopeless, or this is just a bad situation, and just what can happen when, and I'm sure there was much prayer also behind a lot of these stories, and just allowing God to move, and following as he led. And that's
Yes.
so neat.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up today, though, I know you're the president of Gracelyn University, and there's so many exciting things going on over there. Can you just share with us a little bit about what's going on at Graceland, how it's different, and how, teachers might want to get involved, and just anything else about how people can connect with you and what you guys are doing?
Yes, yeah, I would love to. As you and I have talked before, Linda, Graceland was formed around this idea that we have a massive need for quality teachers.
Mhm.
And because of our faith perspective, we would love for them to be trained from a biblical worldview. And so when you kind of look out and go, well, where could we possibly get the 300,000 to 600,000 quality teachers needed in education? We said, well, they must. I think they're already in the building. They're already the teachers' assistants, the paraprofessionals working in the school system. But when you look at, like, what are the barriers that they face, right? More than 60% of paraprofessionals are single parents, right? A majority are, their incomes are very low. And so how do they get their degree and certification, if they're making $12 an hour and a single parent? So we said, well, why don't we make a path that's specifically for them? A bachelor's degree in transformational education that in most cases costs our students $111 a month. $5,000 to earn their full degree and certification. That's pretty revolutionary,
Yeah.
right? I mean, and it's one thing to offer something that's affordable, but for us, what's also equally important is the quality of the program. right? So we have 92% retention rates. We have almost 100% pass rates on the certification exams. But we would say all our quality indicators, most people would say that's not possible. You can't take a low-income single mom who a lot of times has trauma in her background and her succeed. And I say, well, we have 1,000 students right now that look like that and are doing that. Yeah, so that's been super, so humbling to get to be a part of. And so as we looked at what's the next step with Graceland, it is starting to say, okay, now that we're getting these great teachers in the pipeline from the paraprofessional population, how do we help the leaders become servant leaders? How do we help teachers upskill into the leaders that they may call to be? And so we're excited to launch next year a master's in transformational education leadership. In the meantime, we are sharing these stories of transformational leaders on a podcast that we've launched called Transformational Educators. And it really is the idea that, I hear a lot of excuses about why campuses can't. It's the kids, it's the teachers, it's the resources, it's all of these things. And I'm like, I know leaders that have done this. So we're going to share 100 examples of leaders that have taken hurting to thriving, and they didn't fire the whole staff, and they didn't get a budget change, and they didn't get rid of all the kids and get new kids. They took what was there and they led humbly with courage, and they saw incredible transformation happen in a real short period of time. So we're just really thankful that, God's invited us into this journey, and we just hope we continue to steward it wisely.
Yeah, and that's such an important message, because I think one of the first steps to change is believing it's possible, believing that you can even do this.
Yes.
So what's the name of that podcast one more time?
Transformational Educators.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. And we'll make sure we link to that. We'll link to Graceland and your book and some of these other resources in the notes or at teachfortheheart.com/362. And Graceland's website is gracelyn.edu, right?
Yes. gracelyn.edu. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for being with us today. Any final words of advice before we wrap up?
Oh, no, you guys are doing such a great job. I think that trusting that leading humbly with confidence, the servant leader model that Jesus, obviously introduced us to, really is the best path. And that the more we can lead like Jesus, right, the more influence and transformation that we'll see.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I agree so much. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Absolutely.
And thank you guys for being with us as well. Once again, all the notes and links you can get at teachfortheheart.com/362. We want to thank the Herzog Foundation. This episode is brought to you in partnership with them. All views and opinions are our own and don't necessarily reflect those of the Herzog Foundation. Well, thank you for being with us. We look forward to being with you again soon. In the meantime, teachers, remember, God is at work in you and through you, and He's using you to make a difference. Keep your eyes on Him and teach for the heart.